Do you find yourself standing at the toilet, willing the stream to start, listening to nothing happen for 5, 10, sometimes 15 seconds? Does it come, then stop, then come again, stop and go, like a faucet somebody's playing with? And does it sometimes dribble again a few minutes after you've already zipped up and walked away? That particular kind of waiting has its own quiet humiliation. In the next few minutes, I'm going to explain exactly what's happening inside your body when the stream stutters, when it dribbles after you're sure you're finished, when you have to push just to get anything moving at all. Because it isn't 3 separate problems. It's one, and almost nobody ever sits a man down and explains it plainly. These days I stand at the toilet and things happen the way they're supposed to. I start, I finish, I walk away. No standing there willing it along. No surprise dribble 20 minutes later that has me checking my pants before I leave the house. My wife noticed before I mentioned anything. She said I'd stop disappearing into the bathroom for as long as I used to. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because for a long stretch of years I assumed this particular kind of ease simply wasn't available to a man my age anymore. I'm 83, and I remember exactly when I stopped trusting my own stream. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, humiliating things that piled up quietly. Standing there longer than felt normal, waiting for something to start. Having to tense my stomach and push, like I was doing something my body should have handled on its own. The stream coming out thinner than it used to, sometimes splitting into 2 directions instead of one. And then, maybe the worst of it, walking away thinking I was done, only to feel that warm, unmistakable dampness a few minutes later. Proof that I hadn't finished at all. I told myself it was just age doing what age does. Everyone slows down eventually, I figured. Hair, hearing, the knees, why not this too? I never brought it up with my doctor directly. It felt too small, too embarrassing, competing for attention against blood pressure and cholesterol in an appointment that never ran past 8 or 9 rushed minutes. So I just adjusted. I started standing closer to the bowl. I started carrying a little more patience into every bathroom trip. I never once asked why any of this was actually happening. Here's what nobody sat me down and explained, and I think it's the reason so few men ever get past this. By 60, roughly half of us already have a prostate large enough to cause noticeable urinary symptoms like these, and most of us never say a word about it to anyone, which is exactly why it feels like a private failure instead of the common, explainable thing it actually is. The prostate isn't off to the side somewhere, an innocent bystander. It sits wrapped directly around the tube urine has to travel through to leave your body. The urethra runs straight through the middle of it, like a hose threaded through the center of a donut. As the prostate enlarges with age, which happens to some degree in most men, that donut tightens, the channel narrows. And a narrower channel doesn't just slow the stream down, it changes the entire mechanics of urination. That's the straining. Your bladder has to generate more pressure than it used to just to force urine through a channel that's gotten tighter, which is why you find yourself pushing, tensing, working for something that used to be automatic. That's the stop and go. A narrowed, irregular channel doesn't let urine pass in one smooth column. It passes it in fits and starts, especially once the initial pressure eases off. And that's the dribble, too, arguably the cruelest part of the 3, because the same narrowing that makes it hard to start also means the bladder can rarely empty completely. Some urine gets left behind, pooling in the last stretch of the urethra, and it leaks out later, after you've already walked away convinced you were finished. Once I understood that all 3 of those things, the hesitation, the straining, the stop and go, the dribble afterward, trace back to one narrowed channel, everything clicked. I wasn't dealing with 3 separate failures of my own body. I was dealing with one mechanical bottleneck, showing up in 3 different moments of the same act. And a bladder that never fully empties refills faster than it should, which is exactly why so many of us are also up 2, 3, 4 times a night. The daytime symptom and the nighttime symptom are the same root cause, just showing up at different hours. For years, one number ran my life, the PSA. It would tick up a point and I'd lie awake the whole night certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer. It measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they push to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. So here's what I actually did once I understood what was really going on. And it started with something I'd genuinely never heard of before a friend mentioned it to me. The root of the stinging nettle plant. I know how that sounds. It's not exactly a glamorous ingredient, and it's not something you'd stumble across on your own. But nettle root has a long history of use for exactly this kind of urinary symptom, and it's been studied directly in men with an enlarged prostate. In one large clinical trial involving over 600 men, researchers found that nettle root extract was associated with meaningful improvement in urinary symptom scores, in the strength of the stream itself, and in how much urine was left behind in the bladder after urinating, the very thing that causes that after-the-fact dribble I just described. The proposed mechanism is worth understanding because it isn't mysterious. Compounds in nettle root are thought to interact with some of the same hormonal and inflammatory pathways involved in prostate tissue growth, and there's also research suggesting it may help relax some of the tightness around the urethra itself, easing that donut-shaped squeeze rather than doing nothing about it. I want to be honest about what this is and isn't. It isn't a guarantee, and it isn't going to shrink anything overnight. But the research behind it is some of the more solid evidence in this whole category of natural approaches, and that's exactly why I felt comfortable bringing it up with my own doctor rather than just trying it quietly on my own. And that's the first thing I'd tell any man listening to this. Talk to your doctor before adding anything new, nettle root included. It can interact with certain blood thinners and a few other medications common at our age, and your doctor knows your specific list far better than any video ever could. That conversation takes 10 minutes and it's worth having before you start. Nettle root alone wasn't the whole answer for me, though. It addresses the narrowing and the tissue side of things, but it doesn't touch a couple of daily habits that were quietly working against me too. So I built out a small nightly routine, 3 pieces total, none of them dramatic on their own. The first piece was double voiding. You urinate normally, wait about 30 seconds, relax completely, and try again. Because a narrowed channel means the bladder rarely empties fully on the first pass, that second attempt often catches what got left behind, which directly cuts down on that after-the-fact dribble. It felt almost too simple to matter, but it does. The second piece was cutting back on alcohol and caffeine in the evening specifically. Both act as bladder irritants and mild diuretics, meaning they push your kidneys to produce more urine right when you're trying to wind down, and they can make an already tight channel feel even more urgent and reactive. I didn't cut them out entirely, just moved my last cup of coffee to before noon and saved any drink for earlier in the evening instead of right before bed. The third piece was pelvic floor exercises, the kind a physical therapist walked me through, simple contractions, the same muscles you'd use to stop a stream midway. Strengthening that muscle group is associated with better urinary control and can support the bladder in emptying more completely, working alongside whatever the nettle root is doing rather than replacing it. None of these 3 pieces would have meant much in isolation. It was the combination, held steady for close to 2 months, that changed my pattern. The nettle root working slowly on the tissue and hormonal side, the double voiding and pelvic floor work handling the mechanics every single day, the cutback on evening caffeine and alcohol easing the irritation. The first few weeks felt like nothing was different. Somewhere around week 5, I noticed I'd stopped tensing up before I even reached the bathroom door. 2 months ago, my son invited me on a long car trip, the kind with hours between rest stops, the kind I'd have quietly declined for years without ever explaining why. I said yes without hesitation this time, and I didn't spend the drive doing that familiar math about how many more miles until the next exit. I think about a man named Lyle, 79, who wrote to me after an earlier video. He told me he'd been standing at the toilet for what felt like a full minute most mornings, just waiting, and he'd started avoiding coffee with friends because he never trusted how the stream would behave once he got there. What actually moved him wasn't a promise of a miracle. It was hearing that the dribble, the straining, and the stop and go were one mechanical problem instead of 3 separate failures. He started with the nettle route after checking with his own doctor, added the double voiding that same week, and told me the pelvic floor work was what surprised him most. He hadn't realized how little control he'd actually had until he started rebuilding it deliberately. If you're on blood thinners or any prescription for your heart, your prostate, or your blood pressure, please hear this clearly. Nothing here replaces your treatment, and you should never adjust a medication on your own. Bring this to your own doctor first, every single time, no matter how small it sounds. Here's what I settled on: a few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once. The growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. I think about all the years I stood at that toilet, quietly bracing myself, convinced this was simply what 80 looked like. Nobody ever sat me down and explained that the dribble, the straining, and the stop and go were one thing wearing 3 disguises. I carried that confusion alone, the way a lot of us do, too embarrassed to bring it up, assuming there was nothing to be done about it anyway. I think about the man I was, standing there tensing up before I'd even walked into the bathroom. And I think about the man I am now, who walks in, starts, finishes, and walks back out without giving it a second thought. That's not a small thing at 83. It's proof this body still responds when you finally understand what it's actually asking of you. If any of this sounds familiar, the waiting, the pushing, the surprise dribble afterward, tell me in the comments how long you find yourself standing there most mornings. I read every one myself. And if an explanation like this one, honest about the mechanism instead of vague about it, is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this every week, and it matters more than you'd think that you're here for.